Good morning, Vineyard Church Glendora. I'm pleased to be able to reflect a little bit on what Karen has just preached to us. I'm going to focus my comments really on the last couple of verses in the passage today. It's just those are the things that kind of stuck out to me. I really appreciated Karen talking about the libation or the drink offering. And it made me think about, when do we see that? What's the context? What's going on there? And so I was refreshing my memory a little bit. And you go back to the drink offering in Leviticus 23, and you find that it's in many ways connected primarily with the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, what's that? That's a feast, an 8-day feast whereby Israel remembers the trek from Egypt to the Promised Land. And they actually spend some time living in these temporary shelters and rejoicing in the freedom that God has given them from Egyptian bondage. And so it was in one way connected with that is the drink offering connected with that. It's also connected in a related way with the peace offerings. Now, peace offerings, like burnt offerings, are voluntary offerings. A burnt offering is and I've talked a lot about this in other contexts. A burnt offering really is a voluntary sacrifice of worship. It's not like the sin offering, which is demanded. Peace offerings also are voluntary. So the peace offering is about celebrating a reestablishment, perhaps, or just rejoicing in a relationship that's there within this kind of fellowship among people who believe in the living God Yahweh. And so whether you're talking about the Feast of Booths or whether you're talking about the communal meals associated with peace offerings, you're talking about community some way. And as voluntary offerings, again, the sin offerings are required, the guilt offerings are required, but the burnt offerings, except for national celebrations, for example, the Day of Atonement, the burnt offerings are voluntary and they're accessible. Everyone can sacrifice something. It doesn't have to be a bull. It could be even grain, or it could be a couple of little pigeons. So whether one is rich or one is poor, one can have access through the burnt offerings. Well, the libation or the drink offering is like that, very often connected again with the peace offering. And so when Paul talks about his pouring out of himself as a free will drink offering, he is doing that within the context of a communal kind of ethos. He's thinking about the Philippians, and he's thinking about pouring himself out as the drink offering, establishing among them this commitment to relationship with them. And how's he doing that? He's giving of himself as a way of demonstrating his commitment to Christ, who gave himself, right? And so what we find in this great hymn in Philippians 2, but, Christ took on humanity and humbled himself even to the point of death. Paul is trying to walk in that way, and he's doing that with and for his community as the drink offering. And what does he invite them to then but a joyful response? To rejoice with him, to rejoice alone, to rejoice with him, all rejoicing under Christ's banner. Now, for those of you that have seen some of the little videos I've created, I've been thinking a lot about joy lately. And in terms of the whole context of this passage, joy isn't appropriate. It is indeed a demanded response in contradistinction, the opposite of mumbling, murmuring, complaining. Paul says, don't mumble, don't murmur, don't complain, be joyful. Now, Karen mentions rightly that yet, how do we fit this in? She talks about how do we fit this in within the need to critique and to call out the unfruitful works of darkness. Even in Ephesians, Paul says, don't participate in those, but expose them. That's exactly what Karen's talking about. Expose the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Well, in thinking about joy, in thinking about what the Bible thinks about when it talks about joy, I've come to this. Joy must take account of wrong or injustice suffered. It must expose it. It can't be joy without doing that. It can't be biblical joy. Maybe I should say it that way. It can't be biblical joy without doing that. Your team wins the World Series. You have that happiness, right? Or you experience a promotion at work, or your kid has that first grandchild, right? And there's the happiness, or there's that euphoria of that moment. But I think when I look at the text more and more, the biblical text about joy, it is joy in the midst of, in spite of, taking account of suffering. So even in the example of Christ, who gives himself, who despises the shame of the cross, a la Hebrews 12, endures it, despising its shame. Why? For the joy that's set before him. I think Paul's capturing that here in Philippians. And I think he's calling us to participate with him, or with all those who suffer, in that kind of joy that looks beyond the moment, to see that eschatological, that final, that culminating joy of what it will be to be in the presence of the one who loves us best. That's how I am processing Karen's very good, awesome message, and how I want to try to use it in my own life. Blessings, my friend.